Welcome, everyone. Appreciate everybody taking the time tonight, joining us for, I guess, what is now our fourth Fireside chat through the Business and Tourism Department at the Mount. This is our first time back this year, so excited to be back and extremely excited to have joining us today, Deborah Rosati, who is all things board of directors within Canada. She's an entrepreneur. She's on countless boards. She's an entrepreneur, as I said. She's an author. She has a really interesting social enterprise, I guess, that we'll talk a little bit about tonight. Really focused on women. Women get on board. It's about sort of facilitating diversity at the board level, getting women on boards, hence the name. But I think for this perspective, I thought it's fantastic to have her join us tonight, talk about sort of her experiences, her business, or her various directorships. And she has some fantastic blogs, which I've been going through for the last couple of weeks. Again, tend to be focused on boards, but a lot of sort of crossover to career advice and fantastic advice at that. So again, really excited, Deborah. Thank you for joining us. We'll, as usual, for anybody who's attended in the past, I will fade into the background. You guys can stop staring at my crackling fireplace. Caitlin Parsons is a student at the Mount. I've gotten to know Caitlin over the last couple of weeks. Fantastic. Thrilled she's willing and excited to be hosting. So with that said, Caitlin, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. I'm very excited to be here and very excited to be a part of this with you, Deborah. So thank you for your involvement.
Thank you, Caitlin. Thank you.
I guess to get started, I'd love to hear about your background and what led you to pursue a career as a fellow chartered accountant.
Oh, where would you like me to start? I guess I like to start the story to say that I wanted to be a businessman just like my father. So where were my steps to get into business? And I thought a business degree was a good starting point. And I think that is good for a lot of people attending this session today. So I decided that I would pursue my chartered accountant designation at the time. And I went to Brock University. That's my alma mater. It was the first co-op accounting program they had that I took. And I articled, did my business degree, and came out as a chartered accountant, and which is now CPA. And so I really used that as my sort of jumping off point. I really didn't get excited, and I shouldn't be saying this, Jeff, with this group. I didn't get excited on accounting. I saw that sort of as a means to give me financial expertise, to give me understanding of how businesses operate. But I went into industry very early on in my career and sort of rose the ranks from being a controller to being a CFO in the technology sector to going into venture capital. And it was really in the early 2000s when I was in a venture capital firm where I was a general partner that I ended up serving on boards of our portfolio companies. And they were predominantly technology companies, early stage. And I had been a former CFO in a technology startup. So I had kind of the operational, the financial, and I understood somewhat at a high level of governance, not that I was an expert in any way. So for me, the business, having that fundamental business foundational piece, I didn't have to be the expert in any one particular industry, but business always fascinated me. And, it's been sort of my 40-year love because it was literally 40 years ago, give or take, when I started down my path as an articling student. And so I think, like anything in life, it's what you make of it. And I took every opportunity to build and grow and develop. And really fortunate to have had the opportunities and the people. I had great mentors, great sponsors that just believed in me, and I had to work really hard to step up. But so that's kind of the why, I guess. Hopefully that answered your first question, Caitlin.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's interesting how you started as a kind of a CPA, and then you kind of found your space in a board, and that was kind of where your passion went. So I was interested to see how that happened, but thank you. And speaking of boards and stuff, would you mind telling us a little bit about your company, which is the Women Get On Board?
Yeah, and so I founded Women Get On Board in 2015, and I really had a very strong mission, which has a social purpose, is hence to get more women on boards. I'd been serving on boards for 15 years of my career at that time, and common denominator on most of those boards, I was usually the only woman. And it was 2015 and it is 2021, and it's still, with TSX listed companies, just over 20% of women serve on those boards. And there's a lot of very qualified women. If you think of graduate students coming out of business schools, coming out of MBA, getting their CPAs, it's 50-50, right? And so why are we not have that representation around the boardroom table? So I was getting to a stage in my career, a lot of my peers were starting to think, hey, I'm transitioning out of being an executive. I'm maybe transitioning out of being a partner at a firm. This corporate director route looks interesting. What are my steps I need to take? And, so I just really leaned in and decided I was going to found a company and build a community, and we're 700 members across Canada. We work with our members, we do programming, we do events, we connect to board opportunities. And so my real satisfaction, my social purpose is to get one more woman on a corporate board. And I think a lot of women, what I see, sometimes they go, I'm not good enough. It's that imposter syndrome. How do I do that? So through our mission, which is to connect, promote, and empower women to corporate boards, we try to do that in many aspects. But at the end of the day, as women, we deserve to be at the table.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely think so. And often I find entrepreneurs kind of have like one moment or like a life event that really kind of spurns them into starting a business. Was there one particular event that kind of made you tip over the edge and say, like, I'm gonna create this and help other women?
That's a great question, Caitlin. I think life is a journey and it's very iterative. I very much believe in the universe, and I believe things come to you for reasons. And I think it really came to me when I would be asked by so many women, how did I get on a board? So I'd have a coffee, I'd have a glass of wine, I'd speak at women in leadership conferences. I had my slides called Women Get On Board. And then finally, I kind of had an epiphany moment. I'm thinking, this is bigger than oneself. I've got to create an organization, a company that can go beyond me and create community. And so really, it was, I guess, pivotal in 2014. It was sort of on my thinking process. I could have, quite honestly, at that stage of my career, I could have continued to just serve on corporate boards, but I felt like I had a inner desire to step up and create that pipeline and help create that pipeline of that next generation of women corporate directors. And, I get real gratification seeing that and having opportunities to empower them. Oops, you're on mute.
You're on mute, Kaylin.
Sorry, I knew that would happen. I was just saying thank you. That's wonderful. And it certainly seems that Women Get On Board was founded out of passion, and obviously it's very important to you to see more women take that leadership role. How important is passion when contemplating becoming an entrepreneur or starting a social enterprise or organization?
I think, there's two P's, I would say, for when you are starting a business. There has to be a purpose. It has to be a very strong purpose. And the purpose for Women Get On Board is to get more women on board. It's quite straightforward. And the passion really comes from my desire to make change, to see that change. And I think the purpose drives the passion, or maybe the passion drives the purpose. They're really intermingled, but I know I wake up every day because I have a purpose, and it's my passion that drives me to fulfill that purpose.
Awesome, thank you. And can you elaborate? I know I was reading a lot on your blog, and you were saying how important it is to have diversity on a board. Can you give us some examples or elaborate on like what kind of benefits we can see through diversity?
Great question, Caitlin. You were well researched. So, I mean, I think they talk about diversity of thought. Diversity of thought is when you bring different viewpoints, different lens from a gender, from an age, from a geographic, from a different skill and expertise. And that allows boards to really be able to do a diverse way of thinking, because, you know, you've heard of the term group think, where everyone comes with the same knowledge, the same experience, the same backgrounds, and they are inevitably going to have a group think mindset. So I think if you can have a diversity of thought around the boardroom table, it will enhance your decision making. It'll allow you to have diverse viewpoints, just like I'm sure with your classes that you're in, and you're doing a business case, you're reviewing, and you know, everyone weighs in and has a different, it enriches your decision making process to have that diversity. Also, it creates more innovation because you're thinking outside the box, you're thinking of different ways. And you know, the data is out there that the more diverse your boards are, the better the financial performance, and even better ethical decisions that go with it. So the research is out there. The more diverse your boards, better performance, better decision making, more innovation, better ethical approaches.
Wonderful, thank you. And talking about that research I did, I was really interested to see that you were on the board of Sears for a long time, for like 11 years or so.
Yeah. Oh yeah. 11, a few years too long. And I have a reason for that. So you want me to delve in there?
I would love to hear about your time working with them, and especially towards the end, I suppose you would have been pretty involved with that.
Yeah. So I joined the Sears board in 2007. And at the time, it was called Omnichannel. It was probably one of the few retailers that had Omnichannel. Omnichannel being, it had catalog, it had online, and it had in-store. And it was probably one of the few retailers that did. And I really believed at that time that e-commerce, that online shopping was going to be a really critical channel for Sears. And they were building the infrastructure, they were building the platform, and we were evolving in that direction. But the demographics of the customer wasn't necessarily doing online shopping. And so I think through my tenure of being there, we were always trying to be relevant and be relevant for the customer. And as you know, Sears was 60 years, a very iconic brand in Canada. I'm very saddened by the end state of Sears, because nobody wanted that to happen. I just think we became irrelevant no matter how we tried to change our formats for stores. So for instance, I'm sure you're all too young, but Jeff might remember Eaton stores, and Sears acquired Eaton stores, and those were really urban in very large centers like downtown Toronto, Eaton Centre, Vancouver Pacific Centre, Toronto Rideau Centre. And that was always the Eaton store, where Sears was more suburban, more rural. And those formats, we ended up selling those. Those were some of our very prestigious real estate holdings, but they were really more urban, and Sears was more of a suburb, rural kind of offering. So I think there was a lot that evolved over the period. I always thought to myself, oh, I'll be on the board for 5 to 7 years. That's a great tenure. That's good. I'll move along. And then come to the 7th year, we went through CEO change. Okay, I'll stay longer. And next thing you know, we're in the 9th year. And we were down a path of restructuring, and stayed on until we got to the end of whatever role we could from a board perspective. So that restructuring process was painful in the sense of, we had to liquidate and sell off assets, and, the company went into CCAA. I think at the end of the day, from a director's perspective, you have a fiduciary duty to act in the best interests of the corporation and all stakeholders. I know there's a lot of debate around, what should the directors done? Could they have done anything differently? And it's a lot. You can always go back in hindsight, but I felt for the time that I was there, we did look at different options. We looked at strategic alternatives. We looked at, as you would in any type of company, whether you're going through growth or you're going through downsizing or restructuring, you're looking at all your alternatives. And I know we were evaluating a lot of different alternatives, how we could be viable, change store format, downsize, reduce store footprint, change the selection. So a lot happened over that 11-year period. I believed in that there was a place for Sears, and it does sadden me to go by some of the old Sears stores. They've been reformatted, they've changed, different different stores have taken over different companies, but it was a long tenure. I learned a lot. And you move on, but it certainly, as a director, it has had a lasting impression on me. I would have not stayed 11 years, but we were going through the CCAA process, so I couldn't walk away from that.
Out of curiosity, because you were saying how your demographic didn't really allow you to kind of experiment more on different facets that you could use the business with. Do you think, I know right now Hudson Bay Company is looking at going purely online. Do you think that's something that could have been a possibility for Sears, or because it was a little bit different, do you think that's something that probably wouldn't have worked for them?
Well, and even if you look at Hudson Bay's strategy today, they've actually divided the companies into e-commerce, and I forget which one is called the Bay, and then one is Hudson Bay, and then one in store. And they realized that it requires different, focuses, and so that they were spinning them off. So one would be completely e-commerce, and one would be in store. I'm not sure, in all any business marketing 101 is, product positioning, know your customer, and all of that. And it there was a lot of attention put on, how can we make Sears relevant? What kind of products can we offer? And then the channel, is it online? Is it catalog? Is it in store? Because those are your channels on your distribution model. So I'm really not sure. There was certainly effort put on and a lot of attention on trying to be relevant and trying different product lines, different SKUs, best of brand, best value, different, pop-up stores, licensing models. There was a combination of many things that we, I don't want to say experimented, but certainly tried. We were getting into the discount business as well, near the end as well. So we were trying different formats for sure.
Interesting. Thank you. That's some interesting insight
I'm sure it'll be a business case in one of the business schools, either business school or law school for sure.
Yeah, it really is like a piece of Canadian history. So I was really interested to get your insight on that. So thank you. And what are some characteristics that you feel are important to kind of, to become an entrepreneur or to be on a board? Are there any one or two characteristics that you think could be handy to kind of, I guess, grow that kind of side of you to keep like the innovation coming or so?
Good. So I think I'll answer those two separately, because I think there's different skill sets that you bring. So from an entrepreneur perspective, entrepreneur at the best of times stands for taking risk. Okay. So you need to be an opportunist at heart when you're an entrepreneur. You gotta keep, there's gotta be persistence, and you gotta have a passion. You gotta have a fire in your belly every day. Because at the end of the day, the buck stops with you, right? And so, there's a really good book by Michael Gerber called The E-Myth Revisited, and it talks about growing a business. And, it's very much like, you can be, if you don't build the infrastructure, the foundation, you're always going to be the technician. So you need to build and grow an infrastructure to support the company's growth. And you need to have a really strong vision of where you're going. And I think you have to be fearless at times, right? And things are not always, you're going to have to pivot in your business. In this last 18 months, most companies have had to pivot during the pandemic, and sometimes for the better. We've had to move everything to virtual programming and events, and it's opened up the opportunity to bring across Canada in different ways, just like how we are doing this session today. It makes it sometimes very, there's trade-offs, but sometimes a benefit comes out of it. So I think from an entrepreneur perspective, I think you have to be a risk taker for sure. You identify, I think when you have it in you, you're always looking at ways, opportunities. Like my brain sometimes doesn't shut off there when I think about being like, how can I do this differently? Oh, I can partner with someone, or can I do this? Or, and I think I don't think you're ever taught to be an entrepreneur. I think it's inherent within you. And I have a lot of very good fundamentals. I've advised entrepreneurs. I've been a CFO for a startup. I invested in, so I've seen different elements of it. I didn't really envision and say, hey, I want to run my own business when I'm post 55 or getting to that age. It was just something that it just made sense to me. So moving to being a corporate director, I think the skills are different in the sense of you're not making the decisions on your own. You have to be a team player. You have to be collaborative. You need to be very strategic. You're not hands-on. So the roles are different. And not everybody makes a good corporate director, and not every corporate director makes a good entrepreneur.
Thank you. And what are some of the challenges you faced in your entrepreneurial journey?
I think for me, two things that really were advantage points for me. One, I knew subject matter. I understood about governance. I understood what it was to be on a board. I understood what it was to be a chair of a nominating corporate. I was on the other side of the table, and I also knew what topics were emerging from a governance perspective. So when I launched Women Get on Board, I came with that knowledge already. I didn't have to learn it. And that's been really beneficial. And then I've used myself as examples, my board resume, a lot of my blogs are very, very practical. I have one on finding your voice in the boardroom, and it's about, being effective in speaking up and having presence and power, and how do you use that to your advantage? And I would say I think you asked about the challenges. It's lonely. You're making decisions on your own. There's gratification, of you can get excited on the highs in the sense you've got a new deal, you have a new client, you have a new partner, but also you can lose though. It can be like, yeah, I didn't get that deal. I didn't get that partnership. And I think you have to be really prudent in how you manage your cash flows. In particular, at the beginning of the pandemic, it was like membership. Are members going to continue being members? What are we going to do? And so, I have all of that background of being a CFO, so nobody really had to train me of how to manage cash flows, but just trying to be ahead of it. I have a virtual team, how to manage them, how to make sure I'm, setting direction and moving the company forward. So challenges would be how to pivot during a pandemic, and no one taught you that. Challenges would be, sometimes you can't shut your brain off. And so the work is always there. As much as I want to take vacations, it just doesn't necessarily work that way. And, so I don't want to say it's 24/7, but it's not like you can just say, hey, I'm going to take a couple of days off and somebody's going to do my job for me. But you can hopefully find opportunity to dial up and dial down when you can.
You mentioned before about mentorship, and did you rely on a mentor during your career? And if so, how important was that in your development?
Great question, Caitlin. I would say I never really had a formal mentor. I would always have colleagues that, so for instance, when I was CFO of the early stage technology company, our end goal was to go public. And I had some of my colleagues in the community that had taken their companies public. So I would say, hey, do you want to go out for lunch? I want to pick your brain. So whether they were a mentor or advisor, I found a lot of them were one-offs, but they were people that I know I could go to and ask questions and find, answers or be guided through that. I think as you evolve, what I have found even more important to me are sponsors, are people that talk about me when I'm not there, in the sense of, oh, you speak to Deborah because she can do XYZ. So the most recent board I have joined is called TAAL, Distributed Information Technologies, and they are a blockchain infrastructure company. And I got introduced to the company because the individual that was joining as president was chair of one of the boards that I'm on. And when they were asking about an independent board member, he said, oh, you should speak to Deborah Rosati. And I like to use that word as a sponsor because he spoke about me when I wasn't even there. He put my name forward, versus a mentor would be more somebody who's advising you, guiding you. A sponsor is someone who's going to be your ambassador and put your name out there. And I think you need a combination of both.
That's awesome. I was actually reading through some of your sponsors on LinkedIn as well, and you had so many. So obviously you have a lot of great connections who think very highly of you.
Yeah, thank you, Caitlin.
Out of curiosity, do you have anyone who looks up to you, whether it be as a kind of a one-off mentorship, or whether there's someone you actually mentor kind of on a more broad term, like more regularly?
Well, I think I mentor every day, but not in a formal way. I do have a young female entrepreneur that reached out to me and asked if I would advise / mentor her. And we've developed a phenomenal relationship over the last year, but I really love, there's a term called reverse mentoring because I learned from her too. And I think, it reminds you, like we usually do quarterly calls and, she'll ask me some questions and then I'll ask her. And then it reinforces maybe what I should be doing or not doing. So I think it's always good to have, and it may not be formal, but she specifically asked, and, with all the time in the world. But one of the things I really recognize, I was asked quite often, oh, as women get on board, do you have mentors? So I created a mentorship program this year, and it really was matching aspiring women corporate directors with accomplished women corporate directors. And so we launched that at the end of March, and we have 17 mentees and 17 mentors in the program. It's a year program. So I've got structured learning and mentoring throughout the year. So I'm pretty excited about that. I just felt like it was an opportunity to do it and do it virtually. So I have women across the country that are matched in different regions because you can do that because we're doing it virtually.
That's awesome. That's great. I think that's a tool that sometimes we forget a lot about, but getting experience from people or getting information and kind of that mentorship from people who've been through it is, I think, kind of priceless. You really have a lot of feel from.
I would say, don't be afraid to ask for help. Don't be afraid to ask for introductions, because what's the worst someone could say is no. Mm-hmm. And maybe there's a valid no, but I have not been shy to ask for help. I've not been shy to ask for introductions, but I think there's a reciprocal, and I probably pay it forward way more on giving than I take. I probably do more of the giving than I do of the taking. But it's a great opportunity where you can pay it forward when you can.
Thank you. And how important is business acumen versus career experience to you? I know, particularly within your experience, because you have so much experience on boards. And you kind of had an interesting career trajectory, which I'm really interested to hear more about.
So good question. So the question is around business acumen versus career experience. That was, business acumen is something you earn over time. You don't show up with business acumen. And I think, just having been there, done it, maybe you don't always have all the answers, but, and I've learned a lot, and being on boards is really about governance and process. And so, I'm facing, I usually for me, my business acumen shows up on a Friday night at 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock, and one of my boards, they're about to go through something, and I speak to the chair of the board, or I'm speaking to the CEO, and there's an issue kind of at the table. And just to be able to be objective and step back and say, and listen first, and then kind of give some guidance. And I just had one situation on the weekend where we didn't have the answer. We sort of brainstormed and we said, okay, how do we deal with this? And we came up, it was the CEO, the chair, and myself of this one company. And we just talked about it, and there wasn't going to be a right answer, but it was what the approach was going to be. And we just came full circle, and we kind of said, okay, here's what we need to do, went through the process, and just came full circle today, as a matter of fact, on kind of the solution. And it was iterative, and it was really a collaborative. Like, I love when you can lean in and you're not making the decision from a board perspective. You don't make the decision on your own, but we were able to kind of walk through some different scenarios. To me, that's business acumen. One, I didn't know the answer, but two, we just looked at it and said, okay, what made the most sense given the situation? And so I feel like my business acumen after 40 years, give or take, really, and there are times I don't have the answer, and then I'm going to drill down, but there's other times where you just have to kind of rely on that and go, use your best judgment, and hopefully put a good process in and be respectful through whatever your decision-making process. Always be respectful and mindful of others, and think about, how would I want to be? If I was in the person's shoes or the other person's shoes, how would I like to be treated, right?
To piggyback on that last question, do you feel that you need to have industry experience to be an effective board member, or do you think there's a good level of kind of natural leadership that you can use as well?
I think it's a combination. I think for me to be on a board, I don't have to be the industry expert, but I have to understand the industry, because you're making decisions. So for instance, I'm on a blockchain technology infrastructure, and we get paid in BSV coin, okay, which is a digital asset. And we are trading off what we have in our treasury, what we have in BSV coin versus what we have in cash. And you need to understand the economics of the value of BSV and how it's trading. And so you do need to understand. I don't have to go into the nitty gritty, but I do need to understand those triggers and those levers in the industry to be able to make informed decisions. So there's a certain industry knowledge you need to understand to be able to make decisions.
Wonderful, thank you. And to go down a left field, you've been a board member of 2 medical marijuana companies. And are you drawn to this field for any particular reason? Or I know last year, I think we had someone who was involved in a lot of cannabis companies. So out of curiosity, was that something that you were interested in particular?
Well, that's a great question. You really did do your homework, and it's not out of left field. You've done your work. I guess for me, I'm always drawn to emerging industries. And so the first medical cannabis company I joined was MedRelief, and it was in 2017, and they were just going public. and they were adding to their board. And so when I was first approached, I just didn't know if I had the time capacity, but I was interested in the industry. I had already been following it. And this was pre-legalization for sure. And I think you have to have a certain appetite. And I think it comes back to my entrepreneurs. Like a lot of people said, oh, it's not mainstream. How can I do it? What will my kids think? What will my family think? And I thought, no, there's a business here. I need to bring my governance. I need to bring my business acumen to the table. And literally within 14 months, that company got acquired for $3.2 billion. Okay. It was a significant transaction. And, I was able to create that value, work on that transaction on a special committee. It was pretty all in that very short period of time. I did not go on it and saying, hey, I'm going for a quick exit. I was going because they were building out a medical cannabis company, and it was medical grade, and it was going to go global. And I really felt for all those reasons, it was the right reason to join. And so then came off that board. And then about a year and some months later, I joined the Khiron because I believed in the global footprint and I believed in medical cannabis. There's been a lot of, articles, and there's been companies that have fallen by the wayside. There's been a lot of consolidation. There's an oversupply for sure on cultivation. A lot of the companies grew too quickly. But the company that I'm on the board of now, Khiron Life Sciences, is a Colombia-based. Their cultivation is down in Colombia, and so there's a lot of nuances in working in Latin American countries, and we have a footprint over in Europe as well. So different. I guess it's one of those emerging industries, and I believe in the long term.
Wonderful. Yeah, I think your instinct was definitely right, especially with was it relief?
Med relief, yeah.
Yeah. I think you obviously have a good entrepreneurial instinct, I guess.
Sometimes they've paid off, sometimes they haven't. It's a portfolio approach, but I just believed in the industry and we were well positioned for that. But we were building that company out, and we had lots of capital, so there was never an issue there. It was definitely a different time in the industry.
Wonderful, thank you. And you do a lot of speaking engagements and panels. What draws you to share your experience and expertise with others?
Well, it really depends. Part of that is that passion to empower others, and I believe in good governance. So it could be a panel on board diversity. It could be a forum on crypto industry, cannabis. It could be a combination of things. Like I don't go, to be honest with you, I do not go knocking on doors looking for speaking engagements. They typically come to me, and I have to be mindful of my calendar. Even when Jeff reached out, I'm like, okay, let me check my date first. Let me see if I'm available. If I can, I do. But I also have I have a day job and I have 2 boards I serve on. So I have to just make sure that I leave myself, and I, author my blogs and my ebook, and facilitate programming. So I just have to be mindful that I can, fit it in accordingly. And I do definitely love giving back. But I think now where things have gone virtual, it makes it a little easier than in person that way.
Yeah, absolutely. Just out of curiosity, you're in the area now, right? Was that just by chance?
Yeah. My son's
wow.
here. My son, it was funny. Jeff called me. I was en route out to Halifax. I hadn't seen my son and granddaughters for 2 years because of it. So it was like, I was coming out here for a month. I'm staying out here for a month. Okay. Coincidental.
Yes, it would have been nice if we could have had you.
Yeah. Person, had I been, yeah, but yeah.
And you've been a guest speaker as well on a lot of business podcasts. Do you enjoy using this platform? And out of curiosity, do you see a big future for this, as I know podcasts are becoming more and more popular?
I think that, so I guess, from an evolution of Women Get on Board, would we create our own podcast series? I would need to think, there's a lot of content we have. So it could be a natural evolution. But then I got to put my business hat on and say, how can I monetize it? Do I get sponsorships? Do I bring a dedicated person? How do I do it? So it's funny you say it's kind of question mark. So I've been a speaker, I've been a guest on many podcasts, and I know the quality of broadcasting and to get it published or to get it posted is a lot of work. So it's kind of a question mark for me whether we will undertake to have a series ourselves.
Caitlin, sorry, just sensitive to time. There's only a couple minutes left, and I have a couple of questions from students. So, are you okay if I jump in?
Okay, great. Caitlin was a great interviewer. Boy, did she come prepared.
She did well. Yeah. Thank you, Caitlin. You're not off the hook yet, but I just want to get these questions in before we run out of time. Deborah, just in the theme, I think it was consistent even in the conversation today. But in terms of the blog, sorry, I'm looking at my other screen, looking at the questions. In terms of the various blogs, there's kind of, I'd say, two common themes. One is around the importance of networking. Another kind of theme that seems to bubble up often is pushing people to get outside of their comfort zone. So could you maybe just expand on that a little bit as to why you feel that's important and maybe the significance of that, please?
So on the networking or the outside, or both?
Both, yeah, if you don't mind.
I would say networking is critical, but it has to be authentic and it has to be reciprocal. Those are sort of two rules of engagement. You can't always be asking from, hey, Jeff, can you make it? Jeff and I got connected through someone we both mutually love. So if that person said, hey, you got to talk to Jeff, I'm like, okay, because I do a lot with that person. And I know you do, Jeff, as an example, right? But there are other people that you might not have heard from for some time, and next thing you know, they show up in your inbox and they're asking for something. And sometimes you just have to develop those relationships. And Jeff and I have already agreed that if I can meet him in person, I will. But we also realize that we have some other, opportunities to work together, perhaps, or connect in the future. So I think networking, you have to be really strategic and you have to be authentic about it. And then hopefully that answered that question.
Yeah, perfectly.
And then in the case of going outside your comfort zone, I'll use an example. So I have financial expertise, as I know, Jeff, you do. And so naturally, the question I'll be asked if I'm joining a board is, will you chair an audit committee? Because I have that experience, I have that expertise. But I sort of turn that in to say, well, if there's someone else who could chair it, I really like to chair the Nominating Corporate Governance Committee. And I did that recently with TAAL. I think they were thinking I was going to chair the audit committee. And I said, but no, I think I'm really interested in chairing the nominating. And you know what? I love governance. I really do. And so I think not that I was going outside my comfort zone, but I didn't want to be defined on, and I know early on when I was no longer a CFO, everybody wanted to find a job for me as a CFO. Like I was defined, they knew me as that. And it took a long time to sort of tell people, no, I'm not, here's what I'm looking for. And so now that I'm in the board roles, I kind of like to say, I don't always have to be defined by being a chair of an audit committee. I'm very capable and very comfortable to chair other committees. I don't think I have the capacity to chair a board at this time, just because of the work with Women Get on Board. But I certainly have chaired boards before, one in particular, not for profit. So I have no problem stepping up and being leading in the boardroom. I think that to me is a natural evolution if you are looking at board service.
Perfect. Thank you. Yeah, I think we think very similarly in many ways in that regard. But just back to your networking question, and this is more of a Jeff question. We do this a lot, with students, and I think, some of us in particular more so than others, but we focus a lot on, pushing networking, because a lot of the students, the ultimate goal is to get a job. So, and the question that inevitably comes up or the comments is, I'm uncomfortable, it's awkward, I don't like it. Can I just do it through LinkedIn? So I'd be just curious your thoughts on, whether it's LinkedIn or probably some other social media site that I'm not familiar with yet. What's how do you view that? Is that a tool versus, a main channel, or, how would you perceive that if people were reaching out to you, and as I'm sure they do on LinkedIn sort of constantly?
Well, I think there has to be a meaningful connection. What I find LinkedIn is getting overused and abused is where people want to sell you a service that's not even aligned to what you do. So don't do that. Find a messaging. Maybe there's a person you're connected to that there's a mutual connection, and maybe you can actually get a personal introduction. So Caitlin, let's say we were on LinkedIn and you saw that we had a mutual connection. You might go to your mutual connection, because let's say we hadn't met today. Like, you might go to that mutual connection and say, hey, I noticed you're connected with Deborah Rosati. Would you mind making an introduction? So that's more of a personal introduction. I think I've had it where, I've done a speaking and people say, hey, I really like what you blah, et cetera, wondering, they might ask a specific question. I'll send them a blog, I'll send them a reference, I'll send them. And I've done the opposite, where I have attended a session and I really like the speaker. So I've linked in with them and tried to say, hey, I really liked what you spoke about, wondering if maybe we can have an opportunity. I noticed we're connected. We have similar mutual connections. So I think you have to be, everyone's really, really busy. LinkedIn is definitely a professional network. I use it all the time, Jeff. I blog on it. I comment on it. I'm active on it. But where I find somewhat annoying and I ignore them is when someone's trying to sell you a service and it's not even remotely close to what you're doing or looking at. So that would be a taboo to me. But I think if there's a natural connection, or if, let's say you both went to the same school or you've had similar employers, find ways that you're connected to that person.
Great. That's great advice. Thank you. And I recognize we're past time, so I appreciate your willingness to stick around for a minute, but I have one last question, and it's really about that person that we mutually love. I believe you guys did some research and had an article in The Globe and around, I guess a study, maybe that's not the best term, but I think a study around the number of women on new public company boards. And I would say it was kind of disappointingly low. So, with that theme, what do you think we need to do as business and tourism professionals, as executives, just as humans, to get, to right that ship?
Yeah. So thank you, Jeff. It was, so basically the data was there's 316 board members on TSX listed companies. And the data was taken right up till August 15th. And of that, just like about less than 25% of that 300, I think it was 316 or 318 board members were women. Okay. And that, to me, when you're going public, you have this opportunity to be able to say, we are going to put good foundation. We are going to, and there were some industries that were even lower than that. There were a few companies where there was not a single woman on the board. Of those 300, companies, there was 3 women female chairs, so that was good, but still that wasn't good enough. So I'm very much a proponent to say it should be tone at the top. It should be culture that you're setting. We all don't want to look the same. Caitlin, we talked about that diversity of thought. I think I like to say, I have a blog and saying board diversity, all of us can be agents of change. We can step up and push back. So you get a slate of candidates as a board and they're not diverse, you push it back and say, hey, we have to go deeper, we have to go harder. Maybe it takes you longer, but the candidates are out there. And to me, I was very surprised by that research for those companies just going public. Like, to me, if I was an investor and I was looking in and I was like, hey, they're not diverse, what do you so sometimes shareholders have the opportunity to withhold their votes if they don't see the diverse candidates on the board, right? And so that has happened, and it could continue to happen, but I really think it should be tone at the top. And I think it should be the board itself looking and saying, how can we bring the best skill sets, diverse skill sets around the board?
Fantastic. Well, I think we've kept you long enough, Deborah. I really appreciate this. This was fantastic. I think the students really get a lot from this. Caitlin, you're fantastic. Thank you for hosting. I guess on behalf of the Business and Tourism Society at the Mount, Deborah, please accept our sincere appreciation for doing this. I certainly owe you a coffee at a minimum. So if you do have some time, I'll shoot you an email this week and we can connect at some point. Otherwise,
Thank you.
Thanks so much. Okay, everyone, thanks for joining. Take care. We'll reconvene next time around. Thanks, Deborah.
Thank you.